I always imagined that if my Lamborghini Huracan Evo ever met a tragic end, it would be with me behind the wheel, maybe on a closed track pushing it just a little too hard. What I didn't expect was for it to be turned into a mangled pretzel by a pimply teenager trying to impress his equally clueless friends. A teenager who, as fate would have it, turned out to be the son of our HOA president from hell, Karen. And just when I thought it couldn't get more absurd, Karen showed up in full self-righteous mode demanding I pay for the damages because, and I quote, "It's your car, dear. Ultimately your responsibility." I'm still trying to wrap my head around the mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, because you're not going to believe how this whole ridiculous saga unfolded. It only gets wilder from here, like a toddler in a candy store with a stolen credit card. It all started innocently enough, if anything involving an HOA can be called innocent. I'd moved into the so-called prestigious Oakwood Estates about a year earlier, lured by its peaceful streets and oversized garages, a non-negotiable for someone who lives and breathes high-performance cars. I'm a retired software architect, and after decades of wrestling with logic gates and impossible deadlines, I found peace in the mechanical perfection of machines like my Verde Mantis Huracan Evo. It wasn't just a car, it was a reward, a rolling sculpture, a masterpiece that symbolized everything I'd worked for. But apparently it was also an eyesore to Karen. Karen, whose real name was probably something bland like Susan, fit her nickname better than a too-tight blazer. She was the self-appointed queen of Oakwood, ruling the community with a clipboard full of violation notices and a condescending glare that could curdle milk. Her ride of choice? A pristine white Range Rover, the kind that screamed, "I judge your landscaping choices." She paraded through the neighborhood in overpriced athleisure that had clearly never touched gym equipment, her expression always locked in a look of quiet disdain. My first run-in with her was almost laughable, a warning about my trash cans being visible from the street for longer than allowed. I thought it was petty but harmless. I had no idea it was the opening act to a full-blown opera of entitlement. The Lamborghini, of course, became her personal vendetta. I didn't flaunt it. I kept it garaged, drove respectfully, only took it out on weekends. But the very existence of it, the way it gleamed like an emerald when my garage door was open, seemed to offend her sensibilities. I'd catch her glaring at it during her HOA patrols, disapproval radiating off her like heat. Once, she cornered me while I was polishing it, pretending to ask about mailbox colors. "Quite a conspicuous vehicle for such a quiet neighborhood, isn't it, Mr. Henderson?" she said, her voice syrupy with fake concern. I smiled politely. "It brings me joy, Karen. And it's surprisingly quiet when I obey the speed limit." From that moment on, I was clearly marked. The night of the incident, I was out of town at a tech conference. My house was secure, alarms set, and the Huracan was resting peacefully in its bay, covered on a trickle charger, untouched. My neighbor, Arthur, had a spare house key for emergencies, but certainly not for the car. Around 2 a.m. Arthur called, his voice trembling. "Mark, you need to come home. There's been an incident. With your green car." I felt my blood turn to ice. "What kind of incident?" I asked, already throwing clothes into a suitcase. "It's correct. The police are here. It's bad." 2 hours later, I arrived to find a scene that looked like something out of an action movie. My beautiful Huracan was barely recognizable, twisted metal, shattered glass, airbags blown, a detached wheel lying nearby. It was utterly destroyed. The young man behind the wheel? Kevin, Karen's son. A lanky, smug 17-year-old with a reputation for trouble and the same twisted sense of entitlement as his mother. He'd broken into my garage, found the valet key I kept in a supposedly secure lockbox, and taken the car on a joyride through residential streets before wrapping it around a telephone pole. Witnesses said he was driving like a maniac, trying to impress his friends. By some miracle, Kevin and his passengers survived with only minor injuries. The car, however, was totaled beyond repair. Sergeant Miller, the responding officer, filled me in. Kevin was already in custody, facing charges of grand theft auto, reckless driving, driving without a license, and endangerment. A small comfort, but one I clung to. Later that morning, after maybe an hour of restless, rage-filled sleep, the doorbell rang. I didn't need to ask who it was. Karen stood there in a wrinkled silk blouse and designer slacks, her face flushed with anger. Her husband Gary, who always looked like he regretted every decision that led him to that moment, stood sheepishly behind her. "Mr. Henderson," she began stiffly, "we need to talk about this unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate incident?" I replied, voice flat. "Karen, your son stole my Lamborghini and destroyed it. That's grand theft. That's a felony." Karen rolled her eyes and waved her manicured hand. "Oh, let's not exaggerate. Kevin made a youthful mistake. He was just borrowing it." I felt heat rise in my chest. Borrowing? He broke into my garage and took the car without permission. That's theft. She puffed herself up, her voice rising. "Frankly, Mr. Henderson, if you're going to own such an ostentatious vehicle, you should expect this kind of thing. It's an attractive nuisance." I almost laughed. My Lamborghini, a nuisance? And then she delivered the punchline. "Since it's your car and your insurance, obviously you'll handle the damages." Discreetly. "We don't want Kevin's future ruined over a misunderstanding. Maybe you could even tell the police you let him borrow it." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at her, disbelief etched into every inch of my face. "Let me get this straight. You want me to pay for the damage your son caused and lie to the police to protect him?" She smiled like she'd just proposed a sensible solution to a minor problem. "Precisely." I let out a humorless laugh. "Karen, you are absolutely delusional. Not only will I not be paying a cent, I'll be pressing charges. And if you think I'm going to obstruct justice on top of that, you're more unhinged than I thought." Her smug expression collapsed into fury. "How dare you? We are pillars of this community. My Kevin is a good boy. You, with your flashy car, you're the problem." She shrieked and ranted, threatening lawsuits and shrieking about emotional distress and endangering a minor. Finally, Gary tried to intervene, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should." "Quiet, Gary," she snapped, not even looking at him. She turned back to me, eyes blazing. "This isn't over, Henderson. People like you always get what's coming to them." With that, she stormed off, dragging Gary behind her, and drove off in her Range Rover, tires squealing. I stood there for a long while, watching them disappear down the street, rage still burning in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for justice for a car, I was standing up against entitlement, against arrogance, against people who think rules only apply to others. And this fight was just beginning. The sheer absurdity of the encounter left me momentarily stunned. But then a cold, clear resolve settled over me. This wasn't about a wrecked car anymore, it was about principle. It was about accountability. Karen had just declared war, and I, a man who built an entire career on logic, precision, and systems thinking, was more than ready to meet her on that battlefield. My next move, after notifying my insurance provider, was calling the best litigation attorney I knew. This suburban skirmish was about to escalate into full-blown legal warfare. Karen's demand wasn't just audacious, it was a flag planted in enemy territory. She genuinely believed she could deflect consequences with arrogance and manipulate the situation until I caved. Even worse, she attempted to shift financial responsibility onto me, using the twisted, attractive nuisance argument as her shield. The logic, or complete lack thereof, was almost impressive in its delusion. My Lamborghini had been parked inside a locked garage, untouched and secure. To suggest that it somehow invited her son's premeditated theft was not just wrong, it was legally and morally laughable. But I knew anger, while momentarily satisfying, wasn't a strategy. I needed precision. Focus. Just like debugging a complex piece of software, I had to identify every variable, every point of failure, and shore up every vulnerability. I called my insurance company immediately to update them on Karen's perspective, and the fact that she had shown up at my home demanding I take responsibility for the damages her son caused. Sarah, my claims adjuster, was calm and reassuring. "Mr. Henderson," she said evenly, "please don't worry about Mrs. whatever her name is. Her claims are entirely baseless. Your policy covers theft and vandalism. We'll be pursuing restitution from the responsible parties through subrogation, including your deductible. Her demand is frankly absurd. That gave me some peace of mind. Sarah advised I document everything, every interaction, every word, every letter. People like that, she said with a weary sigh, tend to make things unnecessarily messy, even when they're clearly in the wrong. Next, I called Eleanor Vance. Ellie, as I knew her, was a litigation bulldog, razor-sharp, unflinching, and absolutely intolerant of nonsense. I laid out the situation from beginning to end. The theft, the destruction, Karen's insane demands. She listened quietly. When I finished, there was a pause, followed by a low, dangerous chuckle. "Mark," she said, "this woman sounds like a cartoon villain. Attractive nuisance? For a locked supercar in a private garage? Demanding you pay for the damage her son caused to your stolen vehicle? This is gold. Pure, legally suicidal gold." I felt some of the tension ease. Her confidence was contagious. "So what's the move, Ellie?" "We play it smart," she said. "Cooperate fully with the police. We want Kevin prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Grand theft auto is serious. Let the insurance company take point on the vehicle claim. They have the resources. And prepare for Karen's next move, because she's coming. She's already threatened to sue you for emotional distress and endangering a minor. Let her try. We'll counter with harassment, defamation if she starts running her mouth publicly, and maybe even intentional infliction of emotional distress on you." She also recommended upgrading my home security. "If the kid was bold enough to steal your car and the mother is this unhinged, who knows what they'll try next?" She was right. I'd already been thinking the same thing. Within days, I had a top-tier security system installed. High-resolution cameras covered the driveway, the garage, the street, even the back of the house. Every possible approach was now under constant surveillance. I also began maintaining a detailed log of every interaction with Karen or any other HOA board member. My neighbor Arthur, bless him, was an unexpected ally. He confessed he'd seen Kevin loitering around my house more than once in the weeks leading up to the theft, always acting suspicious. "That one always gave me a bad feeling," he said. He felt guilty for not speaking up earlier, but I assured him his statement was still valuable. His observations painted a clear picture of premeditation. He was happy to provide a written statement to both the police and to Ellie. Meanwhile, Kevin was out on bail. To my frustration, his parents had scraped together the funds and brought him home. Rumors spread quickly. He was under some kind of curfew, but that didn't stop him from acting like a local celebrity. According to whispers from other teenagers and a few tech-savvy friends, Kevin was bragging about the whole thing. Is locked social media? Not as secure as he thought. Ellie's digital investigator archived everything. Veiled posts, screenshots, likes, comments from his friends cheering him on. There was even a smug selfie posted just hours before the theft with the caption, "About to do something legendary. YOLO." He was digging his own legal grave, and his mother was handing him the shovel. Karen, of course, didn't stay quiet for long. Just days later, I received an official-looking envelope from the Oakwood Estates HOA. It wasn't a demand for car damages, thank God, but it was almost as insulting. It was a violation notice, for my lawn. Apparently, a patch of grass near the sidewalk was 1/4 of an inch too high. The attached photo, grainy and clearly taken from a vehicle, looked like it was shot from the passenger seat of a white Range Rover. The pettiness was breathtaking. My car had been stolen and wrecked by her son, and now Karen was coming after me for grass height? It was obvious this was a campaign of harassment. I photographed my lawn from every angle, took measurements, and drafted a professionally worded, legally airtight response. Sent via registered mail, of course, with Ellie CC'd. I politely explained the alleged violation was unfounded and appeared retaliatory, especially given the ongoing criminal investigation into her son. Karen wasn't backing down. Over the next few weeks, I received a steady stream of HOA notices. One claimed my mailbox was too faded, despite being less than a year old and looking brand new. Another said a paver in my driveway was discolored. These infractions were so petty they bordered on parody, but each one was documented, photographed, and countered with precision. Karen clearly believed she could weaponize her HOA authority to wear me down until I gave in. But she didn't understand who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some guy with a fancy car. I was someone who had spent decades solving complex systems, tracking down the smallest bugs, and outmaneuvering chaos with logic and persistence. Karen, with her clipboard tyranny and her delinquent son, was just another broken system waiting to be debugged. And I had all the time in the world. She's probably doing it to others, or worse, mismanaging HOA funds, Ellie had said during one of our strategy sessions. It's a common pattern with these petty tyrants. That single statement opened an entirely new avenue of investigation. While my primary focus remained on the theft of my Lamborghini and ensuring Kevin faced the full consequences of his actions, dismantling Karen's stranglehold on the HOA was becoming an increasingly appealing secondary mission. If she was willing to harass me over a quarter-inch of lawn, what else was she capable of? I began speaking to neighbors more frequently, casually at first, subtly probing to gauge their experiences. Arthur, naturally, was already on my side. But others, initially guarded or indifferent, began to open up once they realized I wasn't just some guy throwing a tantrum over a car. They saw I was serious and I wasn't backing down. What started as isolated grumblings quickly coalesced into a disturbing pattern. One neighbor, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Lectavis, shared how Karen had forced her to repaint her front door 3 separate times because the shade of blue wasn't HOA approved, costing her hundreds and causing months of stress. Another neighbor told me his modest solar panel proposal, encouraged by the city, had been denied by Karen without cause. He later learned that Karen's brother-in-law, who didn't offer solar services, had previously lost a bid on the same roof. The deeper I dug, the more apparent it became. Karen was running Oakwood Estates like her personal fiefdom, using her position to settle grudges, reward allies, and punish anyone who didn't toe her line. This was no longer just about my Lamborghini. This was about justice, for the entire community. Meanwhile, the investigation into Kevin was picking up steam. His cocky attitude had reportedly begun to fade as the weight of reality set in. The charges were serious: grand theft auto of a $250,000 vehicle, felony reckless endangerment, and more. Ellie's tech contact had even managed to recover deleted text messages from Kevin's phone, via a court-approved warrant, which painted an even darker picture. In one message, he bragged not only about planning the theft but also noted that his mom wouldn't care, and might even find it funny, if that show-off Henderson got taken down a peg. That message changed everything. If Karen had any foreknowledge, or even fostered an environment where her son felt safe committing felony theft, she was more than just a negligent parent. She was potentially complicit. Ellie's eyes lit up when I told her. This might move her from just being an enabler to being a legal liability, she said. We need to tread carefully, but this is a huge development. We passed the texts along to the detective in charge who, by that point, seemed exhausted by Karen's near-daily calls proclaiming Kevin's innocence and accusing the department of targeting her family. But while Karen remained oblivious to the mounting legal storm, she continued her petty campaign against me with renewed zeal. The violation notices escalated. First, the lawn, then the mailbox, now accusations of unauthorized landscaping for replacing a dead rosebush with a healthy one of the exact same species. She even tried to claim that my new security cameras violated HOA aesthetic guidelines, conveniently ignoring that several other homes had nearly identical systems installed. Each attempt was met with a calm, firm rebuttal, carefully worded responses drafted by Ellie that not only cited the exact bylaw language but highlighted the selective and retaliatory enforcement patterns. Karen's frustration was becoming visible. I'd see her driving slowly past my home, lips pursed, eyes narrowed, her pristine white Range Rover now noticeably neglected, as if she'd become too consumed by her vendetta to maintain her own image. Then one afternoon, as I retrieved my mail, she struck in person. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Mr. Henderson?" she hissed, her voice low and poisonous. "With your fancy lawyer and your smug letters. But you won't win. We're the HOA. We make the rules." I smiled calmly. "Actually, Karen, the members of the HOA make the rules. And I'm a member. And I suspect quite a few others are starting to get tired of how those rules are being misapplied." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," I replied smoothly. Just stating a fact. Transparency and accountability are beautiful things, don't you think? And with that, I turned and walked back inside, leaving her seething beside the mailbox, fury radiating off her like heat. But it wasn't just me she was fueling. Her overreach was backfiring. Her arrogance, once tolerated, was galvanizing quiet resistance among residents. The annual HOA meeting, usually a dull formality, was shaping up to be a showdown. Ellie and I began planning in earnest. She drafted formal motions and resolutions we would introduce at the meeting. A proposal for an independent audit of the HOA's finances over the past 3 years, spurred by growing rumors and Mrs. Lektavi's troubling experience. A call to revise and standardize the enforcement of violations to eliminate selective targeting. And the boldest of them all, a motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. It was a gamble, but the momentum was on our side. I began canvassing in the evenings, speaking to more neighbors, compiling evidence. I built a dossier complete with copies of every retaliatory notice I'd received, contrasted with photos of worse violations at homes of board members and Karen's allies, violations that were conveniently ignored. Statements from Mrs. Lektavi's, Arthur, and others willing to speak on the record about their own harassment. And most damning of all, Kevin's social media posts and texts, some suggesting Karen's tacit approval of the theft. This wasn't just about proving Karen was a bad president. It was about proving she was a liability. A corrupt, retaliatory figure misusing her authority, with clear conflicts of interest and no regard for the rules she so ruthlessly enforced. Meanwhile, the police investigation neared a conclusion. The district attorney, armed with evidence of premeditation, the severity of the theft and the staggering value of the vehicle, was preparing to formally indict Kevin on multiple felony charges. So much for Karen's claims of a youthful mistake. My insurance company also moved efficiently. They officially declared the Huracan a total loss and began processing the claim. The final payout was still under negotiation, but the bigger news was that they had launched formal subrogation proceedings, seeking to recover the full payout directly from Kevin and, as his legal guardians, Karen and Gary. The walls were closing in. And the best part? Karen had built them herself. Brick by petty brick, and then there was the deductible, substantial, and yet just another piece of the mounting financial pressure now squeezing Karen's family. A pressure entirely of their own making. But Karen, ever delusional, seemed to believe she could still control the narrative. 1 week before the HOA meeting, she distributed a glossy, self-congratulatory newsletter. It painted a laughably idealized portrait of Oakwood Estates under her visionary leadership, a suburban utopia, all thanks to her. Buried within was a passive-aggressive swipe at unnamed disruptive elements, who were, in her words, undermining community harmony with frivolous complaints and refusal to respect long-established standards. It was a thinly veiled shot at me, and everyone else who had dared to challenge her rule. All it did was strengthen our resolve. When the night of the HOA meeting finally arrived, the community clubhouse, usually half empty and filled with the sounds of board sighs and rubber stamp approvals, was standing room only. The word had gotten out. The air buzzed with energy, curiosity, anxiety, maybe even hope. Arthur caught my eye with a confident thumbs up. Mrs. Davis gave me a quiet, encouraging smile. Karen, surrounded by her loyal but visibly anxious board, sat at the head table, doing her best to look composed. But the way her treasurer nervously shuffled papers and her secretary glared at the floor said otherwise. Karen tried to set the tone with false bravado, slamming the gavel a bit too hard, her voice too bright, her smile too sharp. She wore what I could only assume was meant to be a power suit, navy blue and severe, with a gold necklace large enough to serve as a down payment on someone's mortgage. She droned through her usual speech, property values, community pride, adherence to standards. But tonight the audience wasn't buying it. People shifted uncomfortably, murmured, exchanged glances. The tide was turning. Then she opened the floor for new business. Ellie stood, calm and composed, having registered as my proxy. Madam President, members of the HOA, she began, her voice cutting through the silence with poise and precision. I'm Eleanor Vance, legal counsel for Mr. Mark Henderson. We have several items of new business to propose. Karen's smile faltered. Lawyers, Mr. Henderson? She scoffed. Is that really necessary? Ellie didn't blink. Given recent events and the concerns voiced by multiple residents, yes, it is. And then she delivered the hammer blows. First, the proposal for a full independent audit of the HOA's finances. Next, a motion to review and overhaul the process for violation enforcement to eliminate selective targeting. And finally, the boldest move of all, a vote of no confidence in Karen as HOA president. With each point, Ellie presented concise, irrefutable evidence. Examples of retaliatory fines, sworn statements from neighbors, documented inconsistencies in rule enforcement. And then she brought up the texts, Kevin's own words bragging about the theft, and hinting at Karen's indifference or even tacit encouragement. A gasp rippled through the room. That's a lie. Karen blurted, her face drained of color. Fabrications. My son would never, I would never. Ellie simply replied, the evidence will speak for itself, Madam President. Then I stood. My name is Mark Henderson, I said, my voice steady. Many of you know about the theft and destruction of my car. What you may not know is that shortly after, Karen showed up at my home, not to apologize but to demand I pay for the damages. She asked me to lie to the police to protect her son. When I refused, the retaliation began. I held up the stack of violation notices I had received. Behind me, a slideshow showed my perfectly maintained lawn, mailbox, and driveway, next to unaddressed violations at the homes of Karen's allies. The room was buzzing now. Heads nodded. Conversation started. The illusion of Karen's benevolent leadership was crumbling. And then, perfect timing, the clubhouse doors opened. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by Sergeant Miller. Ma'am, he said, approaching the head table. Karen. Last name, I have a warrant for your arrest. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Karen stood frozen, mouth agape. Arrest me? For what? Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and potentially accessory after the fact to grand theft auto, Sergeant Miller stated. Based on new evidence. We also have a warrant for Kevin, last name. He's being taken into custody as we speak for additional charges related to witness intimidation. An officer stepped forward. You'll need to come with us, ma'am. Karen looked around wildly. Gary looked like he might faint. Her bored cronies stared at their feet. There was no help coming. No rescue. No cover-up. Her reign ended not with applause, but with the unmistakable click of handcuffs. As Karen was led away, sputtering and protesting, the room remained silent for a moment, then a wave of shocked relief and quiet murmuring spread. Not a cheer. Not yet. But the chains had cracked. Ellie gave me a subtle nod. The moment had landed. Karen's undoing hadn't just been Kevin's texts, it had been Karen herself. Her ego. Her misuse of power. And the community finally speaking up. The meeting wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Gary slunk out shortly after, muttering apologies to no one in particular. The treasurer and the glowering secretary looked stunned, realizing, perhaps too late, that they'd tied themselves to a sinking ship. Arthur stood and broke the silence. Well, he said, his voice firm, looks like we have a vacancy. And a lot of work ahead. That was the turning point. People began speaking, really speaking. Ideas flowed. Grievances were aired without fear. Ellie, ever the tactician, brought the room back to order. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, tonight has been dramatic, but we still have important business to handle. Perhaps we should begin by electing an interim president and scheduling a special election for a new board. The motion passed with overwhelming support. Mrs. Davis, quiet, mistreated Mrs. Davis, was nominated and, to her own shock, elected as interim president. Poetic justice. The motions Ellie and I had prepared were passed almost unanimously. The forensic audit was greenlit. The violation process suspended pending reform. And a committee was formed to rewrite the bylaws with transparency as the guiding principle. I volunteered to advise, finally putting my analytical mind to work for something that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, Oakwood Estates began to heal. The audit revealed a Pandora's box of Karen's corruption. Embezzled HOA funds, bogus consulting payments to her brother-in-law, and even maintenance on her Range Rover filed as administrative vehicle upkeep. She was slapped with additional criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Karen eventually took a plea deal, probation, restitution to the HOA, and a lifetime ban from any leadership role in a community association. Her reputation was ruined. Her marriage didn't survive. Gary filed for divorce, citing irreparable damage from her behavior. Last I heard, Karen was working a low-paying retail job in a nearby town. The fancy car, the jewelry, the smug arrogance, all gone. As for Kevin, he was convicted on multiple felony counts, sentenced to juvenile detention, followed by years of probation and community service. His days of legendary joyrides were officially over. And me? I replaced the Huracan with a Porsche 911 Turbo S. Chalk gray, sleek, understated. Still a beautiful machine, but less of a magnet for trouble. Sometimes as I polish it in the driveway, I reflect on everything. The sheer absurdity. The madness. The war that started with a stolen car and ended with the fall of a tyrant. But more than that, I think about what came next. Peace. Fairness. A neighborhood finally free from fear. It cost me a Lamborghini. But it gave an entire community its voice back. And that's a trade I'll live with, happily. So, what's the craziest HOA story you've ever heard? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to like and subscribe, because you never know what kind of insanity I'll uncover next. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the most attractive nuisance is the one running the HOA.